Thank you all for your patience. We're going to start, everybody. You guys want to come up front? You going to stay back there? Okay, good. Well, welcome, everybody. My name's Rob Fenstermacher. I'm the CEO of Cultural Vistas, and I'm really glad that you all were able to join us this evening. I've heard there's a little bit of traffic out there, so we may have some people coming in a little bit later. I'm really excited that we also have this wonderful venue here at Parasoma that we could utilize tonight. I got here about 2 hours ago, and this place has been transformed in the last hour. When I came in, there were 8 ping pong tables here with people filled doing work. This is a shared workspace for startups and entrepreneurs, so it's a really ideal location for us and fits with our theme today, or this evening, of global entrepreneurship. Tonight's event is part of a series of events that Cultural Vistas has been doing over the year, where we've been bringing together all of the various people that we work with on our programs. So that may be participants who are here in the United States on our internship and trainee exchanges. It may be American alumni who've been on our programs overseas, various partners, etc. But the point of these events is to bring together all of the people that we work with and give them opportunities to share ideas, network a little bit, and have discussions on important issues. So tonight, we're going to be talking about global entrepreneurship. We have 3 wonderful panelists here who I'll introduce in just a second. But to give you a sense of tonight's format, basically, we want this to be as much as possible a conversation. So we'll start off with the panelists talking a little bit about their companies and their projects. And then I'll start off with a few questions to get the discussion going, but then it really is going to be incumbent upon all of you to ask some really good questions and keep the conversation going. As you've seen, we're videotaping everything tonight. It will likely be posted on our website and on YouTube, so try and be careful with the kinds of questions you ask. No, there's nothing secretive here. Also, if you are so moved, you can also tweet if something comes up that you feel is really exciting at #ThinkGlobalSF. So I encourage you to do that as well. You can also do that on Facebook as well. So with that, I guess I will already turn it over. I'll introduce really quickly our 3 panelists. Their full bios are in the program, so I encourage you to have a look at that. But I'll start here at my left with Bob Eberhardt. He's the research leader at Stanford's program on regions of innovation and entrepreneurship, the project on Japanese entrepreneurship. And his connection with us is actually through a former intern of ours, Dan Wang, who's done some research on, in fact, our international trainee programs and how people can transfer that knowledge once they return back to their home countries. So Dan referred us to Bob and said he would be a great speaker with us this evening, and I think he may be one of the unique individuals out there. He's an academic, but has been incredibly successful in the business world as well in terms of startup companies himself, and I think that's not always the case, and at least that's what Bob's told me. To his left, we have Karan Singh, who is the co-founder of Gingerio. It's a spin-out from the MIT Media Lab that is a behavioral analytics company developing population management solutions for doctors and patients. So I'll let Karan tell us more in detail what exactly that is. But his connection with Cultural Vistas is that he is currently hosting 2 international participants with his company who are getting an opportunity to experience working here in the United States. And last but not least, we have Vicki Johnson, who is the co-founder, along with her husband Ryan, of an organization called Pro Fellows. It's an online website dedicated to providing information and insider application tips on professional and academic fellowships, similar to some of the programs that we actually do with Cultural Vistas. So with that, I'll hand it over to Bob. Maybe you can say a little bit about your project.
Hey, thank you very, very much for coming here tonight, and it's great. See, we have a few Japanese people here. That's great too. I run the Stanford project on Japanese entrepreneurship, which is a project that studies Silicon Valley by studying Japan. Whenever you study Silicon Valley, you're kind of mashed up in what's going on there and the ideology of what's going on there. Everybody's all excited and they all talk about Silicon Valley. But we wanted to take an economy that is roughly the same as the United States, certainly in terms of its commercial law, certainly in terms of its income dynamic. And really about the same startup rate, and study that. And if we learn things there, then we can apply them here, or if we find the same things here, then we know we found truths. So we're a program of about 40 academics and about 5 universities that study this. The business, just to be real quick about it, the business that I think you referred to is that from 1999 to 2007, I started and ran a successful startup in Tokyo, which is still there, called Wine and Style. 4 rounds of venture capital, and we sold the company in an M&A transaction. We became the largest independent distributor of California wines in Japan. It's still there and still distributing. So anyway, I'm excited to be here, and look forward to your questions in the conversation.
Thank you. Karan, tell us a little bit about Gingerio.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Karan Singh. And it's a real pleasure to be here. I'm actually looking forward. We got a chance to chat a little bit beforehand, so I think we'll have a good, lively discussion. But Gingerio is, we're in the digital health space, so think of us as a smartphone application that your doctor would prescribe to you to understand how you're doing outside the clinic. So the application runs in the background and it collects statistics about your behavior. What we found at research at the MIT Media Lab is that we could use a lot of that data to predict when you weren't feeling well. And we provide that data back to your doctor, your nurse, in the form of a red, yellow, green light, letting them know who they need to be talking to or who they need to be actually helping support outside the clinic. So we work with folks like UCSF here in San Francisco, or Kaiser. As Robert mentioned, we now a team is about 20 people, have a few interns this summer, but also have quite a bit of experience. Just my co-founder is on an O1 visa. We have lots of H1B folks on the team, and so have a lot of experience just in working with an international diverse group.
And Vicki, tell us a little bit about how ProFellow was started up and where.
Yes, profellow.com. So the history behind it is over the years I've done 4 different fellowships, so I've used them to live at different places of the world. And most of you may be familiar with fellowships, since if you're like cultural visas, they have like the Robert Bosch Fellowship for people to go to Germany, the Alpha Fellowship to go to Russia. I've done similar types of fellowships, and what I found over the years is that they were very hard to find online. So you're Googling, you're trying to figure out where these programs are, and there's a lot more out there than you might think. So when I won my last fellowship, it was a 7-month fellowship in New Zealand that was put on by Fulbright New Zealand. And I moved with my husband to New Zealand. And through that process, we also decided that we wanted to start a website about fellowships just to help people find them. So we did that in New Zealand as 2 Americans. And New Zealand was an interesting place to start a startup because it's not really known as a tech capital of any sort of the world. They're trying to change that, though. There's a huge push there for more people there to start companies, become more global, think globally, and you really can start a company in your own home with an internet connection. Bob will attest it's a lot harder than that, but I guess as we get into it, we'll kind of talk about our experiences starting and the challenges and benefits to doing entrepreneurship.
Well, maybe I'll start off with a question for all 3 of you, and you can bring in your different perspectives on the companies that you've started. And it's related to the national cultures where you've been involved in setting up your companies. And I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit about, how do you think national cultures contribute to entrepreneurship? Does the culture play more or less of a role in terms of setting up the company, or is it more important to have the institutional frameworks that allow you to set up these kinds of things? So I don't know who wants to start.
Wow, that sounds like a question for you.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Actually, it's an interesting question. And actually, it's not settled in knowledge. The institutions, that is the laws and also the expectations of what you think should happen, very much condition whether you start a company or not. It looks very much that people who think about starting companies look at what their friends are doing. And what research is very clear about is that you don't start a company because you admire Bill Gates. You start a company because your friend is starting one. It's very much a peer relationship. And you're in a group of people like-minded who are starting companies, or your best friend started one, or your guy from college, or your best girlfriend from high school started a company. Start one. So in that sense, the institutions that are your shared beliefs are very, very, very important. Of course, regulations matter. So in some nations, it's harder or more expensive or less expensive to start, but those seem to be fairly minor. It's really where you are. And this is another thing that's very important in terms of national and culture. Entrepreneurship seems to be very local. The United States is not Silicon Valley. There's a lot of entrepreneurship in Silicon Valley. My parents in Detroit do not like at all that I was an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship's not common across the United States. There are parts of Japan which are very entrepreneurial and parts that are very, very not. So it's very local. So when we think about it, it's maybe not the national context. It's maybe the local context. Who your friends are, who your peers are, seem to be very, very important.
And maybe you could pick up on that, Vicki. You started the company in New Zealand.
Yeah, it was really
So
interesting being an American in New Zealand and just comparing it to how Americans are versus Kiwis. I don't know if any of you have ever been to New Zealand, but they have something called the tall poppy syndrome, where they really don't appreciate people who are overly confident or self-aggrandizing. So, being an entrepreneur in a place like New Zealand can be a little challenging because, it really does take a lot of confidence. You got to sell all the time. You're constantly giving your pitch, whether you're trying to raise money or just explaining your idea, you're in a competition of any sort. So I think some people in New Zealand kind of struggle with being confident and talking with confidence because it's not really culturally accepted there. And I thought, that was sort of surprising to me. People are also much more risk adverse than they are here. Americans were used to putting lots of debt on our credit cards. We're used to being kind of, just taking more risks especially in terms of finances, I think. And I find that it's very different in New Zealand. People aren't much more likely to go the job route than go entrepreneurship route. Even people who are really interested in entrepreneurship, sometimes they tend to talk about it more than actually do it. And entrepreneurship is definitely something you need to do. So I don't know, that was sort of my experience. So being in San Francisco is completely different. I've never seen or felt entrepreneurship the way it is here in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. it's...
Can you expand upon that?
Oh, sure. I feel like everyone I meet on the street has a company, is starting a company. We often work down in Hacker Dojo, which is in Mountain View, which is a big co-working space for startups. Everyone there, there's people there that are just starting to people that have already raised a couple rounds of funding. So to me, it's being surrounded in this mecca of people that are doing companies is really helpful because it does make you feel, it's like, whether your friends, associates are doing it, it makes you feel like, great, if they can do it, I can do it. If you're not in a community or city that is like that, you do feel much more alone and isolated in what you're doing. So.
And Karan, maybe you can tell us a little bit, why did you choose to start the company here? Did you look at different places in the United States? Did you think about different countries? Or what was the specific reason to do it here?
So actually, we started the company while I was in graduate school in Boston. So we got started about 2.5 years ago in Boston, opened up an office in San Francisco back in November. And so actually have offices in both coasts. And see a lot of similarities in terms of, I think, both institutional framework, but also cultural framework or cultural norms around, a willingness to be more risky, failure not being a black mark per se. There is actually these, you're much more open. We found, you're in the coffee shop and you can turn to the person next to you and maybe you overheard a conversation and you strike up a discussion, and that's led to, our first customer. That's led to one of our angel investors, and that sort of openness has been tremendously helpful. That being said, I received a fellowship when I was in graduate school, and part of the fellowship, the deal was that I would start a company that had global social impact. So part of our growth curve or trajectory is really to find ways to bring what we're doing locally, globally. And so part of the advantage of bringing on board folks through the Visa programs and otherwise is starting to get a sense for what it would take to actually take what we're building with Gingerio here in San Francisco, Boston, across the US, to other markets like Brazil and India that are sort of next on our list.
And that, I think, leads to another question when we're talking about the local, global aspect of entrepreneurship in terms of the barriers that might exist for startups when you're in a global marketplace. So what things do you run into when you're trying to be a local startup but use global resources and be global in nature? What kinds of things do you run into?
Oh, that's, from a practical standpoint, I think that's very interesting. My company in Japan, we sold not only across Japan, but to mainland China, Taiwan, Singapore, a few other countries. And of course you're dealing with simple things, you know, local tastes differ. What's acceptable. For example, Facebook was very popular in Japan for a short time, becoming less popular for lots of reasons, or different tastes in cell phone can change the way you want to deploy a product, and usually they're practical reasons, not really cultural. But what's surprising is that many entrepreneurs, I think, try to take what they hear and be global to start. Really, entrepreneurs are successful when they focus. Sure, you want to eventually be global, but probably, at least what we look at when we work with a company, it's better to be successful at least in one overseas market or one local market. Do that really well, then do another one. And do that really well, then do another one. There tends to actually be a problem when companies try to be everything to everybody. There are local things you have to pay attention to. There are local people who have to sell. If people aren't there in the local market, they're not taken seriously. So it's sometimes you can waste all your resources. And the biggest way companies fail, by far, is by trying to do too much too quickly and spreading the resources too fast.
And you have so much going against you anyway.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. So I think that's
so
exactly right. Yeah.
That's not stacked down as even higher.
Right. So I think that's the really big issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what about the resources, though, that you use? I mean, talking about exchanges and the fact that we have individuals here, and you mentioned you have people on different visas. I mean, is that a challenge, getting the skilled workers you need?
Here, yes. I mean, absolutely. And I think programs like this obviously can really be powerful in that regards. And I have some of my fellow founders that I've gotten to know over the last few years have actually started opening up offices in other international locations because there's a mix of technical talent, and potentially because it's the starting point of now reaching out into a new market by first starting to put your office there and getting a sense for local norms and tastes. That could be a jumping point to actually launch a product in that market. So very much so.
And this touches on Vicky, the programs that you're trying to promote through the fellowships, and what Karen was saying. Do you think Americans who are here, who want to open up those offices, do they need to have done fellowship programs and exchange programs earlier on so that they've learned about those cultures where they're going to try and work?
What I would say, if you're going to start a company here, especially in San Francisco, but even anywhere, finding engineers especially to do tech companies is very, very, very difficult. If you can't build it yourself, there is actually some global platforms where you can hire people who don't live near you, but there's companies like elance.com, you can hire engineers on that platform. And what I would say too is, don't dump all your money at the get-go. I mean, if you really get into learning about entrepreneurship, you'll learn about the MVP, which is your minimum viable product. So you want to build something as cheaply and basic as possible, using hopefully as little resources as possible, and test the idea to even see if anyone's interested. You might think everyone will be interested. Actually, very few people are interested, or somebody's already doing it better. But yeah, I mean, you can use platforms like elance.com to find tech help, or And the other thing, really, it does come down to being local as well. I mean, get out there, get to meetups, try to meet other entrepreneurs, engineers, either in your graduate programs, down the street in the next cafe. You can always meet people. It is really hard to convince an engineer to come work on your project, but that's a whole other story, so we can get
Do you think people who've done exchange programs or fellowships are more entrepreneurial than others? Or do you think it's more
it depends on the
entrepreneurial people who choose?
fellowship. It depends on a lot of the fellowship programs are about public policy, or they're about research, or about, an entrepreneur is a very special kind of person. Maybe they're a bit insane. Maybe they're, but it is, I didn't know, to be honest, to full disclosure, I didn't know anything about entrepreneurship 2 years ago, and I had done multiple fellowships. It's really something my husband knew a lot more about, and then as I started getting into it, I found that, oh, this is a really interesting thing. My skills, I think, match this being an entrepreneur, but it is, I think one thing about doing a fellowship is that you already have that drive. You've done the competitive application process, and if you have the willingness to go and be outside your comfort zone, like move to another country or just do, an exceptional type of project or job, I think that gives you, a good chance at getting into entrepreneurship.
By the way, if you don't mind, add to that, just I think what she's saying and what she said is exactly right. What is interesting, particularly about programs like this and other programs, the best entrepreneurs, and this is very clear, are jacks of all trades. They can do lots of things. The entrepreneur is ultimately going to be called on to do everything anyway. And the people who are most successful at it, you find a lot of them are pilots, for example. You find a lot of them also, sail. A lot of them speak foreign languages is very important, or have different kinds of educations. So the best entrepreneurs usually have been accountants too, So the best entrepreneurs are usually jacks of all trades. So programs like this are very, very supportive. And as both of the fellow panelists alluded to, the entrepreneur is usually an unusual person, usually not in the mainstream either. And so anything that distinguishes and creates that yearning or longing to do something tends to create it. So, it's stuff like that can be important as any broad experience, and particularly an entrepreneur experience can help. Even if you're staying overseas and you never sell products overseas, you'll still have learned something.
Touching on the cultural issues one more time, and then I'll pass it out to the audience to continue the conversation. But I'm curious about the cultural trait that people think, or at least I've heard here in the United States, is important about being willing to accept failure. And that's got to be part of a national culture, that you can fail and pick yourself up and you start again. And there are certain cultures, and I guess as you were saying earlier, there's different parts of the countries that may be different. But then in general, the United States tends to reward failure after you do it multiple times, whereas other countries, maybe Japan and Germany, that's not the case. So I'm curious if you could say something about that, and then also you said you've had classmates that you've been with from different countries, and have you seen that a little bit in terms of mentality from different countries?
You want me to start?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. It's an interesting thing. Failure is a very complex subject and people's acceptance of it. First of all, it's very local, and I'll get into that in a minute, but let me first, in Silicon Valley and in most entrepreneurs, let's dispel one myth. It's never good to fail. Okay, anybody tells you it's good to fail, please tell them they're not telling you the truth. It's not good to fail. Okay, it hurts, and there's a reason to avoid bankruptcy is not good. And if you have an entrepreneur, if you're a VC and you're investing in an entrepreneur with 2 successful experiences and one with 1 success and 1 failure, you're likely to give the money to the 2 successes. That's what's facing you. So it's not a good thing. The question is of forgiveness, and is it ever seen as something that will be, an asset to you in the future? And that depends very much on how you fail and the reasons for your failure. So in the Silicon Valley, and certainly in Japan, because I was around all the entrepreneurs. By the way, all entrepreneurs are, take a lot of risks. It doesn't matter what their nationality is. If you're an entrepreneur, you take risks. And if you hang out with entrepreneurs, you think we all take risks. And if you talk to successful entrepreneurs, they will always tell you, you got to take risks. Well, you need to talk to the failed ones too and see how they feel about it. But here's the important thing. If you fail, and you fail with full information, with transparency, people know why you failed, it was a good attempt, you didn't pay yourself a lot of money, you didn't, not hide the fact from your investors and all that, and it just didn't work out, then it may be forgiven. And lots of serial entrepreneurs start again. This is kind of thing. On the other hand, if you kept it a secret, if you paid yourself a lot of money, had a nice party, there was a famous party in 1998 in Silicon Valley where they took their entire investment round and had a nice party. If that kind of thing happens and you fail, then nobody will forgive you, Silicon Valley or Japan. And you'll never get a job again. So it really depends on, at least an entrepreneurial job. So it depends on how you fail and the people around which you're failing. People who tell you that the culture is unacceptable for failure, usually they're speaking in very broad terms. It's the entrepreneurs in that culture you're concerned about and how do they accept failure. And certainly in Japan, which is famous for being reticent about failure, failure is accepted in the entrepreneurial community. Everybody knows it's going to happen. Depends on how you fail.
Correct. What have your experiences been? Similar?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think Bob really described it well. I think it's a story you can tell about that failure. My co-founder and I say all the time, and if I was to do this again, I wouldn't have done X or Y. And being able to reflect as you go through the process is very, very critical. So, like Bob was saying, being able to be really transparent and own up to the mistakes that you made and describe why you would have taken a different path. And then as an investor, that's what you're betting on, right? Now all of a sudden that person has that much more data, and it's not that they just didn't do well, but they actually now would outright have made a different decision, wouldn't have hired that person, wouldn't have spent that money in that way. And that extra data, that extra evidence, that extra experience, that's what's valuable. And I think that's what we in Silicon Valley, if you will, or in general in entrepreneurship, value. And I think that's what's important. So making that distinction, I think that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And maybe just to finish off before we go to the audience with questions, do you think you can learn entrepreneurship in another country?
Well, I never took a single course or anything. I did a government degree and a public health degree, so I have no entrepreneurship course. But the way I learned it was literally just hanging out with other people who were doing startups. So first of all, my husband Ryan, who's back there, and then I also, going to meetups, reading books like Eric Rees, Lean Startup, just getting out there. Don't sit in your house and think you're going to learn it just by being in your little hole. You've got to get out there and talk to people, learn the lingo, all of it. And and 2 years later, I know exponentially more now than I knew when we started ProFellow. So yes, you can learn it, but probably not in the traditional sense of the word. Although you teach it at Stanford. But I think you would probably encourage people to get out there and just do it.
Well,
and that's
we
really
teach people mostly that it's
Yeah.
that they're not going to learn it in the classroom.
Yeah.
So I think what you said was exactly right. It's as we said before, it's Jack's of all trades. People with broad life experiences. Generally speaking, the older you are, the better an entrepreneur you are. That's not saying that you're more conservative. It's just you've had more experiences. And just exactly as you were saying, it's the people around, it's the peer effect. It's it's the perception of the market. In fact, someday if you want to teach yourself about who are really great entrepreneurs, go to the Inc. 500 list. That's the link, the list of the 500 fastest growing companies in the United States, and look at the bios of the founders. That's right there too. You're going to find that they are people, usually a decade or so of experience in the industry. They saw a niche, they went off and did it and quit their good paid job. Those are usually the best entrepreneurs, and that's again, they're around, they're in a round of people, they're getting it from their peers. So can it be taught? Yes, but you have to acquire it just as I said, on your own.
What made you want to be an entrepreneur? And
Yeah,
what was your
I
spur?
was studying medicine. I was studying entrepreneurship, sort of at MIT and Harvard, and I had a lot of skepticism on whether I should even be taking an entrepreneurship course. I actually really enjoyed the experience, and it was primarily because of sort of the opportunities that I got to do rather than just learn, and the stories I heard. I mean, more than anything, I think one of my favorite classes in school was called Founders Dilemmas, and it was just a series of tensions, discussions, difficult decisions, and a debate about what you would do in those situations. And that sort of was that extra data was really, really helpful for me. But as Bob and I were talking about beforehand, the reality is the vast majority of entrepreneurs fail and fail consistently. And so there's no doubt that it's a challenging path. But like we were talking about earlier, I had, by virtue of being in the entrepreneurship program, had a self-selected group of people that also seemed to have that gene. Not everybody did, and they sort of fell out. But then the core group that was left, I have of my closest friends from school. 10 of them have started companies, and 6 are sort of still working on them and have done a really great job. So.
Well, let's open it up to the audience. We have the mic up here, so we would ask if you have a question to please come up here and actually ask the question, because we want to be sure to get you on video. And please say who you are and how you're affiliated with Cultural Vistas, assuming you're affiliated with us. Anybody have a question? We have some budding entrepreneurs here, I'm sure. Start with you.
Oh,
who's going to go. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Cecilia. You guys helped me with my visa. Like everybody else probably, I work with Adobe, so one of your clients, I guess. So I have a question for all of you. When you go through your hiring process and you see all these wonderful applicants, probably at equal strength for certain groups, what will make you decide to hire somebody who is going to take that extra effort for you? Because international people, you have to go through the visa application, and then there's a risk of what if they don't like this country or they don't like this place and then they want to leave. There's extra risk and efforts. What would make you decide to pick this person rather than somebody local? That was a long question.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we have this conversation often. I guess first off, it's never equal. I mean, people serve, it's never at par. There's always going to be some amount of difference. But our general hiring philosophy is, get a chance, date before you marry, if you will, in the sense that get a chance to work with someone in some capacity, see them doing whatever function you're actually going to be bringing them on board to do. And by virtue of that, you'll get a sense for how they're going to perform on the job. And so if that means we're finding that person internationally, so be it. If that means we're finding that person locally, that's also okay. There's just logistically challenges like with the H-1B process in terms of having to get in the application and only really having a couple-month window to really effectively run someone through a process and submit an application in time. But for us, it's really about finding the best talent, and they're usually never equal. There's always going to be some amount of difference.
Do you look for people who have international experience? Is that something critical? I just asked, maybe all three of you may answer that question.
Not explicitly per se, but that international experience can be tremendously helpful as a different perspective. And we work with, our customers, i.e. our hospital patients. Many of them are immigrants or come from different backgrounds or different experiences. So making sure that we can understand where they're coming from is tremendously critical, that we have that perspective on the team. So from that, I'd say from that angle, yes.
We've actually hired people online to build and do things for us. So, it's a little different because they're not actually physically here in person. They get to stay where they are, do their work, and then be paid. So, I guess on those platforms, the best thing to do is to find, to get recommendations in there and try to get, as many recommendations in those systems as possible. So if you're going back to your home country, you want to get hired as a freelancer for startup companies in Silicon Valley, that's the best thing to do is get good recommendations.
How about with your company?
Well, my company, we hired largely local salespeople, so we're looking very locally. But the way we hire, I think, is also reflective of what is known about hiring people, and that is people hire people they know. If you want to maximize your chances of getting hired anywhere, it's how strong your social, your friends network is. It's really that simple. And if somebody says, and he's got a stack of resumes, and somebody says, hey, I know Cecilia, she's just terrific. That goes to the top of the thing. Just that simple. It's your social network that does it. So in programs like this, parties, friend networks, all kinds of ways that you can make yourself known as someone in that business who has a lot of integrity. Boy, that's what gets you hired at the top of the list.
And that's what an internship is.
Hi, my name is Ronald Fox. I'm the CEO of WhoMentors.com Incorporated. I'm also the advisor to, a venture capital fund. This question is first from Mr. Fenstermacher and then a question to you. If you can speak first to the students, a lot of them are coming here as graduates. They're going to go back to their countries facing the glut, so to speak, like in Korea and China. A lot of them are graduating and there aren't jobs. So if you could sort of speak like why it's important to come to America to learn entrepreneurship, and then you guys being those persons that receive that particular talent, what could be a reason why they should come to America to learn entrepreneurship from you?
I think I would just mirror some of the answers we've heard to the questions thus far of the idea of getting that international experience. It sets you apart from all of the other individuals trying to get a job. So whether it's an American going overseas and coming back here and competing with the rest of the talent, the fact that you've had that experience overseas sets you apart on your resume. You've gained, again, a little more risk-taking abilities. You know, you've been in a new culture that might have been different for you, and you've learned how to adapt to that, which again I think is something, you know, flexibility and learning how to deal with adversity. Those are all traits that you learn from being an international exchange participant. So I think that applies to all of the international trainees here in this room, is that you're going to learn those skills, and you're going to learn a new perspective on things. I think that's also what we've heard, is that, you know, when you're starting a company and you want to be entrepreneurial, you have to be able to look at things from a lot of different perspectives and deal with those challenges as they arise. And I think, again, you've gained that skill by being an exchange participant.
I think that's exactly right. As we've said before, the entrepreneurs are people with a broad range of experiences and a broad range of points of view. And programs like this or other programs, anything that just stretches you out is going to make you a better entrepreneur, because, as I'm sure I'll leave to these two people to tell you, but I know it's true in my case, nothing in my company that happened after the first day I expected. So you have to be able to deal with, you know, new stuff all the time, and experience helps you deal with new stuff.
I would just say the very fact that you're here, I mean, there are thousands of students and professionals that want to come here to get experience or study. And the fact that you're even here, you're in a top, you know, 1% of people internationally. So, I mean, make the most of this. I mean, if you're here now, like he said, your networks and the people that you meet are really going to be the best way to get a job in the future. So, you know, if you're going back to Korea or somewhere else, then if you have international connections that you've built through the experience that you had here, you know, that's probably going to be a great way to get yourself a job wherever you are, whether you're back in your home country or here. So just be sure. I use LinkedIn. I'm a big LinkedIn fan. Everyone I meet professionally, I try to, you know, even socially, I try to link with them on LinkedIn, because then you can see, oh, I'm interested in this job at this company. I can go into LinkedIn, do an advanced search, and find out who in my network may have worked there, interned there. Might even be a second connection. You can ask the first connection to introduce you. So use LinkedIn, especially if you're looking at jobs that are at all related to an American company.
And they're not sponsoring tonight's event. That
No,
was
no.
just personal kind.
Thank you very much.
I think there was a question here. And then Paul.
Thank you very much. I was very interested. My name is Naho, and I work at a venture capital now, and I'm seconded from a Japanese big telecommunication company. So I think I have a question, especially for Robert. If you want to make a big impact to the society, I thought in Japan it was better to work in a big company and to make new products. That was my thought. So there I made new products and came over here and to know what the ventures are doing over here and connect them. But you were talking about entrepreneurship in Japan, so what are your thoughts?
Thank you. It's an interesting question, and people bring it up a lot, and it is kind of important to look at the way brings out the great cultural differences, but it's not cultural differences, they're economic differences. Japan does have big companies where you can go and get a job and do well in it. That's becoming much and much less important. About 7% are in lifetime employment in big companies now. It's not very common, but it's more common in the United States. In the United States, particularly Silicon Valley, there are no large employers. Okay, the largest employer in Silicon Valley is Stanford University. The second largest is Lockheed. Okay? You know, and the point is, if you graduate from college and high school, who are you going to work for? The point is, you almost have no choice. You're going to work for a small, growing startup. That's what's there. Those are the companies. So you don't have the alternative choice. If you are an intelligent person graduating from a university, you're given a choice. One hand, you get a job. You're going to be promoted largely for your seniority. You're going to grow and get regular pay raises. You're going to get a pension. You're going to retire. You're going to be able to pay for your family, and they're going to be able to, your kids will go to college. That's your choice. Here's the other choice. You're going to start a company. You're likely going to go bankrupt. There is no pension. Okay? And this is a really hard job, by the way. What do you think people pick? So it's not that the Japanese people are different. It's that in Tokyo, there are different alternatives. Okay? And that is, though, changing. Many people in Japan are hakken, or temporary workers without benefits. Those people are finding entrepreneurship. Many women are frustrated and starting new jobs. In fact, the rate of technical company startups in Japan that are led by women is twice that of Silicon Valley. There are more women starting technical companies in Japan than women starting technical companies in Silicon Valley as a percentage. So we're seeing Japan changing. It'll be different than the United States. China will be different than Japan, and Korea will be different than Germany. But what you're seeing in this big company, small company, everything else, the choices people have. And that's why you need to understand the different countries you deal with and what's dynamically happening there. Silicon Valley is unique, but it's because of our unique circumstances, not because we're wonderful people. We're not, we're just regular.
It's not about the choice, but I want to know which is better to make a social change, to make new products, which is easier for Japanese to do it in a big company, because when I was making new services, I could get $5 million, and I got $5 million to make it. So I don't need to do the fundraising, right? But if I'm an entrepreneur, I have to do that. So I thought it was much easier in a big company.
I think it's easier to, if you're what you call a social change of producing a product, certainly being part of a team in a big company, get resources. You can get it if the product is your thing. On the other hand, maybe it's you want to be an example to other people or make a social change where people work. A good example of social change, my good friend Mikitani, who started a company called Rakuten, became the wealthiest man in Japan. That became a big example. How about Namba-san, who started DNA? Everybody knows her, right? Because she started a company that's more profitable on Facebook, about the same size as Facebook. Nobody's heard of it, and same thing, social media, right? So these people change the way people in Japan think about entrepreneurship and the example they set. So maybe that's the way to do it. So I think it depends on what social change you want to make.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I'm Paul Gallagher, and I'm a former Bosch Fellow. I spent a year at courtesy of the Bosch Foundation in Germany 20 years ago. My question is a good segue from this last woman's question and comment. I was at a dinner about a month ago that was hosted by a delegation of German founders and CEOs led by the head of the German economics ministry. And there was a dinner in Palo Alto, and Mark Andreessen was the dinner speaker. For those who don't know, Mark Andreessen was the founder of Netscape and is currently founding partner of Andreessen Horowitz, one of the leading VCs in Silicon Valley. And he said that his own experience was highly improbable. His Netscape started as a graduate school project, and he kind of bumbled his way into what became Netscape. And he said his advice to young people would be get a top-notch technical education, finish your education, don't start up a company right away. Go, get a job at a Google or an Apple or a Facebook where you'll actually learn something, it's very kind of conservative advice. So just kind of would put that to the panel and sort of how does it resonate with you based on your own experience? Like listening to you guys, it's not clear whether you guys had an interesting idea and said, hey, I could make something out of this, or whether you had entrepreneurial zeal to start something at any cost. And I just would kind of like your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's another one of those tensions, absolutely. I went into graduate school with the intention of, or at least an interest in giving it a try, provided I found the right team for that idea. And so for me, I was at a point in my career where I wanted to take a risk. I had been working in consulting beforehand, and then been working for a larger company. And so I felt I had a little bit of that track record, and I had 6-7 years of experience in the industry in healthcare to be able to say I could take a bet. But I absolutely, I also agree with the advice that if you're coming out, especially if you're coming out of an undergrad, I think as we've been talking about, this common misconception that most entrepreneurs are in their 20s is not true. I don't know what the average age is.
It's just not. In Silicon Valley, the average startup entrepreneur is 38. In Japan, it's 39. Just so you know.
Yeah, and I think we forget that, right? I think it's easier to popularize all the success stories but I think there's value in getting some of that evidence. But I also do think, to the question maybe earlier, Naho, you were mentioning about sort of social impact. I mean, with very little money, you can have a ton of impact, and you can get exposure to so many ideas, so many people, and really get a chance to live that dream. So I do think that there is that tension, and that is real, because the cost of experimentation is so low that while maybe it means you work for, large tech company X, on the side you start to run some experiments to figure out, hey, are some of the ideas, or is this thing that is this sort of passion that I want to try to start something, or at least be involved in an early stage startup, is that real? And actually experiment with that. I mean, Vicky was mentioning that earlier.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think that is great advice that he gave, because one of the most important things is finding good people to work with, and that is probably the hardest thing about having a startup. I mean, finding people that not only are smart and driven, but actually have interest in the products that you're building and are willing to see it through all the ups and downs. I mean, it's like dating. I mean, it's really, really, really hard, and that's why a lot of them fail, is because the groups that come together, they think, you just throw a bunch of people together and you think, okay, yes, we're gonna make a company. It doesn't work that way. It's like, can you imagine spending 24 hours a day with this person for the next 360, for the next year, 2 years, 5 years? If the answer is no, chances are you're probably not going to do much. Not to mention, if you are smart enough to get a technical degree from a great school and get a job at Google, I would say do that. And you not only will make great contacts at those companies that could be your potential co-founders when you go. I know plenty of people that have worked at companies like Google, Facebook, that put in their dues, spent their years. They make great salaries so they can sock away a bunch of money, and then they go, start their startup. It may fail, it may succeed. If it fails, a lot of them go back and work for Google again. So, I mean, I think that was actually very good advice. Go do that. If you have the aptitude to do it, do it.
Anything to add other than I thought that's good. But the advice your German friend gave is exactly right. It's what I teach. Exactly the way you get good entrepreneurs.
Just a comment, because of the refrigerator, we need to speak louder for everybody in the back, so please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Nikki Lendeman. I'm a Health for America Fellow, and I'm really interested in international development. So I was just wondering, since you all have experience abroad, and because every culture is so different in terms of language and everything else, and culture and all of that, I'm just wondering, if you have a great idea in the US, or you have a great idea in another country, how do you kind of transfer that idea into another culture? So say, like, if you're a Peace Corps volunteer, and something works really well in the United States in a certain impoverished community, how do you kind of tailor that and transfer those kind of elements into a different community?
That's a hard question.
You're the entrepreneur.
I mean, I'll just tell you how I did it as an entrepreneur, because it's hard to do that from research. Because as an entrepreneur, we treated Japan as the same as every place else. Very, very much. People buy product for value and just sell it that way, and treat people as people. And look at that people may be conditioned by their local government to act differently. They may be, they may have some historical stories that they tell, but generally speaking, if you're in a commercial space and you're selling stuff, people's reactions are largely the same around the world. It's mostly discovering what, at least for us, what was valued, and we did that by being non-arrogant about it. We didn't guess what it was. We just went to the grocery stores and saw what people were buying and marked it down. Once we knew they were buying, we just provided that at a great price. So it's not hard. That's just basic entrepreneurship. So I'm not sure how to answer that broadly, because I don't really know. I mean, I tend to think there is less distance between cultures than the media likes to make true. I have friends around the world. I can go to any of 20 cities around the world and pick up the phone and find 10 places that, friends to stay with or have dinner. And I don't treat any of them as different than, my son or my wife or the people around me. So that's my perspective.
I mean, I would say too, if you're looking at an international development company or nonprofit, I mean, if you have Peace Corps experience and say you've spent 2 years in Ghana, you're definitely in a good spot to be able to do something, because you know that culture. If you've never been there, trying to build an app here that you think that they're going to use in Ghana. Well, I mean, you need to get to the customer. So who is going to use this product? I mean, that's really true, I think, for any startup or product that you do. You have to talk to customers all the time. So if you're trying to build, I think it is hard because Americans are in a bit of a bubble when we think we can build an app to fix every problem on the face of the earth, when in fact, that's why so many of them fail, because they're just not problems. So yeah, I mean, you want to build an idea, you have an idea, you need to get it into the field and test it, no matter whether you're here, in Africa, in Asia, wherever you are, yeah.
Got this great idea for this company. We're going to put some of my media up and share it with my friends over the internet. Anyway, there's just a lot of stuff that, and the reason for that kind of sarcastic remark is to make it clear, if you're going across anywhere, if you're selling anywhere, the thing is to just as you said, find the problem that's there and what problem is your company solving, and don't copy somebody else's company because that problem's already been solved.
Yeah, no, I mean, just to summarize, I'd say making sure that it is a sort of prime issue. It's pain, greed, fear. Those are translatable, irrespective of culture. But then understanding how you, for instance, if it's in healthcare, and we're talking about, there's actually a pain associated with a specific condition, and you have a solution to solve that, making sure that you actually have some on-the-ground experience. You yourself have some on-the-ground experience, plus all of your team does, and then actually talking to customers in that space, and starting small, testing, doing the things that we've all talked about, that it's actually not that hard, but getting some data, seeing the differences that may play out between if you have it here and you want to take it now somewhere else, what some of those differences are, so you have time to iterate around that. But you're going to have to give yourself some time to run through that process.
So, hi everybody. I'm Kim. I'm coming from France, and I'm actually working at Adobe. First of all, we'll start to try to give an answer to you. I talked to a guy from LinkedIn a few days ago, and he's got a good example to describe how you have to adapt your business into the different cultures that you have. Because LinkedIn is actually based on how you network with other people, which is kind of the thing that changed a lot between different countries. They had to find a solution of this problem. And actually what they've done, what they've chosen is like in a different country, they got a specialized team which are just working in this area and trying to have some feedback of the users and try to see if it's accurate and do some improvement. And if you go into LinkedIn website in France, in the United States, or even in Japan, it will look really different. It's like there's not the same link, not the same way of doing things. So if you want to have some answer, it may be interesting for you to talk to some people from LinkedIn. So this was my first point. And to go to my third point is I still got 2 studies left in France. And I was wondering how I can just do some studies in the United States, because I read that you are in Stanford and you've been in MIT, which can be like great, I guess, good studies. And I think it might be interesting to just see the different way of learning stuff by just going into another country, learn by another language, and just it's a different approach. So what might be your advice to go into this nice schools? And because actually the main issue is that the price is really high, and when you're students, especially I got my own company in France, so I don't have a lot of money. And how can I manage that? Yeah.
Look on profellow.com. We've got fellowships for international students. Fulbright is a huge exchange program that provides grants to go for graduate study, and there's a lot of other grants. There's also, each university has usually its own internal fellowships, so it does take a bit of research, but you can get scholarship or fellowship funding to study at schools. And the hardest thing is actually just getting into the schools, getting picked. I think, you have to have a really unique resume because you're competing with people from all over the world, especially, schools like Stanford, MIT. So in that sense, you know, it's good if you can find people that have gone to those schools and talk to them about, you know, learn about their backgrounds, what it is that you need to highlight. Make sure you have people that read your resume and make sure that it reads well. English is perfect, everything is right, and also make sure people read your essays and your project proposals if you have to do a project, because a lot of times people just do it all on their own, and they don't realize, they don't see, you know, some of the mistakes or some of the way it reads because you're only doing it by yourself. So it takes a village to get into these schools. So.
Let me just add, but it's relevant to what she's saying. If you're going to school to be, you know, learn more about entrepreneurship, the culture, the best classes you're going to take are going to the bar, hanging out, late night drinking beer, or if you don't drink beer, wine, you know, or if not that, sodas, you know, it's okay too. But the lessons that are going to really stick for entrepreneurship are not going to be the accounting class, so that's important. Okay, it's going to be the people you meet and people you're going to be friends with afterward, and who are interested in that space, who are going to come, we'll help you work, and you're going to be able to call, you know, Renee and say, hey, come over here, I've got this idea, I want to talk about it. The reason that MIT, Stanford, Cornell are great schools partially is because of the social networks that form, the friendship networks that form by people who go there. And part of the selection process of getting in, of course, is will these be people that add kind of a fermenting body of groups of people. So, yeah, go to them and have a good time. That's really the best training you're going to get.
I kind of agree what you're saying is like, but the good one also is to go to Stanford. It's kind of an excuse to meet these people, meet either the teacher or the people who are actually studying. So this is why it could be an interesting step. Okay. Thanks.
There were some questions over here earlier. Come on. He's coming.
Hello there. My name is Tatsuhiro Furuya. I'm from Japan as international internship. Then I have two questions, especially about the point you mentioned. What kind of failure can be acceptable for entrepreneur, especially in terms of the relationship with investors or society? And my second question is, how can we make the most of our international experience? I'm pretty sure that many of people here have some international backgrounds. So what kind of challenges or what kind of failure can make a huge difference in their future career or their next steps? Yeah, those are my questions.
Failure is never a particularly great thing, but because it's failure. You know, it's better. Winning is always better. Winning as far out cash is great. But it's acceptable, and you might be forgiven if you are, and there's a point that both of my co-panelists made, if you are really honest with people. I mean, failure is always going to be failure. If you're going to fail in Japan, for example, 60% of the times just don't get sufficient sales to make up for the cash that they're spending, okay? And that's probably true in the United States, it's probably true anywhere. Not getting sales, it depends on why you didn't get sales. If you try something really interesting that everybody agreed was interesting, and you produced it well, and you produced it to specs, and everybody knew you were trying, and you went out there and the market just didn't come along, or the market changed, or a competitive product came in. People understand that. You're keeping everybody informed, all right? But if you don't sell enough because you waste money on product development rather than salespeople or something, or you've seen something we see common in Japan a lot, we're trying really hard to make Rev 1.1111111 just a little bit better rather than getting it out there and selling it, then it might not be forgiven because you showed you weren't paying attention commercially to your needs. So any failure that shows you were taking care of your business, and business is about selling stuff. It's about selling products, or it's selling services, or it's selling something, but it's selling something for more than it cost you to produce it. So you bring a profit to the bottom line. That's what entrepreneurship is about. Many entrepreneurs, and I hate to take this direction, but I do need to make this point, because this is particularly true in Japan, see entrepreneurship as a technical development process. It is not. You hire engineers to produce something you want to take to the market. Entrepreneurship is about selling stuff. So, to get to your question, what's the acceptable failure? You kept that in mind. It was clear you're a business person. You had all those things. Things do happen. Everybody knows that. All right? But if you were just stayed in the lab with 10 friends and you just kept trying to produce a better technology, maybe people say, I don't think this person gets it, so maybe I'm not going to try on them again. So it's what shows that you're an entrepreneur. P.T. Barnum was an entrepreneur. Always remember that. And also, I will give you one last story because this is very important. Stanford, everybody talks about Stanford entrepreneurship. Do you know who Stanford is named after? It's named after Leland Stanford's son. Okay, Leland Stanford was an entrepreneur. He came into California in 1848 along with the gold rush people. Because everybody was coming here to buy gold in 1849 and dig up gold and find gold and everything, right? Was he an entrepreneur digging up gold? He opened a hardware store and sold shovels. He became the richest man in California. Never forget that.
And I just want to say something to what's the most important thing you can do while you're here. Like I think we said this a few times, but social networking, like get out, I don't mean on Facebook, I mean get out to meetups about entrepreneurship, get out, there's probably 5 events a day going on in San Francisco or down in the Valley. So like you said, meet people, talk to them about what they've done, you know, try to stay in touch with them. Like LinkedIn's kind of a great way to link up with somebody without, you know, it's just a really easy way to keep track of who you've met. And, you know, that's how you lead to contacts at companies. Like you said, the only way to get a job these days is really to know somebody. So do not stay in your apartment, dorm room, whatever. Get out, talk to people. I know it's a little bit hard to, like being in another country and, you know, you have language barrier, you have all these other things, but don't be, it's a very international city, so don't be afraid of just getting out and talking to people.
Have a good time.
Yeah, and have a good time. That's very important.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you nailed it, but even more, it's, I mean, with a goal in mind, right? So there are a ton of networking events and social events, but you know, if you can choose, if there's maybe an industry that you're really interested in, or there's a specific type of function you're interested in trying to get into after an internship, do it with some sort of, at least some level of focus, because then you'll be able to go deeper within that, and you'll be able to actually build more meaningful relationships. And as you start to have those conversations, you'll get a better sense for what's required in that space. But I absolutely agree. I mean, ultimately, it's going to come from the handshake or from someone in the network being able to put in a good word to get you in the door somewhere. It's always hard to follow the entrepreneurship trend, sorry.
Any other questions? Okay, please. So maybe we'll take one more after this.
Hi, my name is Yoshi from Tokyo, and I'm one of the participants from Kizuna project, which is supported by Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I actually have a question for Dr. Robert. So recently, so my understanding of the session of you guys made, like looking at the local place is very important to be startup. But recently in Japan, I have seen the statistic in my class in the university that more and more people, especially young people, want to move to like city area, especially Tokyo, which cannot be like opposite of what all of you saying, because the looking at the local place is very important. And even though it was very important for like to be startup, but the more people just want to move to the city area. And I also remember right before coming to the United States, I have read the a news article saying number of the people, especially university student and high school student, less and less people want to go to other country as an exchange student because they are happy with that situation being in Japan rather than going to other country to face difficulties. So I guess that's gonna decrease number of the people who tend to be like good at starting startup. So what's gonna be the very good solution for Japanese society as a whole in terms of like humans, resources, and the system of the education? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I'll try to be real, tough one, I'll try to be real short. Of relevance, otherwise I wouldn't mention it, I do sit on a body that advises the Japanese government on entrepreneurship policy. And so we see these numbers all the time. And there's two things going on that I think are most important in the way you talk about. First of all, the move to Tokyo. I won't speak for these two, but I bet you they will tell you that the reason they are where they are is because of where they found resources to do what they do, in the markets to do what they do. So here's where the money is, here's where the people I can find, here's where I can sell whatever it is I'm selling. That's why I'm here. And in Japan, if you're going to get those things, it's going to happen in Tokyo. It just really is. If you look at the number of companies that start around Japan, they start where people live, same population. But technical companies start in Tokyo because that's where international trade is focused. And much more importantly for Japan, many people think that Japan exports electronics, right? It doesn't. It's about 0.5% of its exports. It's just really tiny. Japan, 70% of Japan's exports are capital goods, machine tools, industrial robots. And the startups are in that space, the good ones. They're making customized software for machines. They're making embedded software in CNC and lathes. And where are those machines going? They're being shipped to China where we're building factories, right? So that's international trade, and that's why it's in Tokyo. So it's natural to be there. So that makes the point these two were making earlier, that you have to study local conditions and understand not so much the culture, it's the local economics. It's what's happening there, and you have to do that by opening your eyes. The second thing I think that you at least alluded to that I think is really, really important. Yes, less Japanese people want to go overseas. This is a specific Japanese question, so I'll be real quick about it. And people complain, well, there's, the Japanese, we used to go overseas to study school. Well, you remember 15 years ago, there were no MBA programs in Japan. And over the last 15 years, all the schools have become nationalized, and they've actually changed their curriculum. So a lot of people are choosing to stay there. So again, it's not a cultural thing, just local circumstances have changed. So the larger point is that if you're going to do business overseas, you're going to do business in a new country, what's good about these exchange programs or internship programs is go and open your eyes and look at the local conditions. And entrepreneurs are really good at that. Good entrepreneurs can kind of like, see, this is what's going on, and this is how I can sell stuff, and that's the important thing. I mean, I started a company in Japan, and it grew fast largely by not worrying about it being a problem. So I hope that answers your question.
So maybe I'll ask one question to finish it up, and I'd like you all to answer it. And since the majority of the folks here this evening are international trainees and interns who are here in the United States, I wondered if each of you could maybe give one thing that you think is specifically American pertaining to entrepreneurship that they can take back with them to their home country. What is it that you hope they will have learned from the United States, from this experience?
That's a hard one.
I like starting and ending with a zinger.
The ability to live off fast food. I don't know. I'm trying to think. I don't know. It's interesting because I see, I think there's like an American stereotype of startups that were young and running around San Francisco and like really taking lots of risks and failing and starting again and failing. But it's funny, I see this type of person everywhere. I've lived in the UK and Germany and New Zealand, and I've seen that type of person in every country that I've been to. So I don't think it's so much, this is going to skirt the question, but I think it's more that kind of person that is an entrepreneur is everywhere. But I think it's much more stereotyped maybe in the US because we've got Silicon Valley. But really, this person is everywhere. And they're selling everything from you know, kebabs on the street corner to, you know, huge companies based in Silicon Valley. So I don't know, I don't really, to be honest, I don't know what's truly American. Because now that I've traveled a lot, I see that person everywhere. And I feel that because of internationalism, we're starting to see more similarities between us rather than differences, at least I hope. Maybe you can think something American, I don't know. It's really hard though.
Yeah, I'm gonna give yeah, I will skirt that question too. Yeah, I don't know. I think what I have seen, at least from my peers who have started companies, that's my data point, is you know, this sheer determination to stack the odds in your favor, and so you know you have the infrastructure in place like you do, let's say in Silicon Valley. So you have the dollars, you have the attention, you have the talent. One of our investors called it sort of the Florence during the Renaissance. You have this confluence of trends, ideas that are all coming together that is quite unique, and because you in some ways you do have the ear of the world, but then at the same time, you know, it's also, you know, you have to be careful not to think that way, because as we've been talking about it as the theme of the panel, it can be very different in each geographic locale. So I'd say that if I was in your shoes and I wanted to try to replicate this experience of being an entrepreneur in another country, or my home country, it would be take that trait of you know, thinking of the 3 or 4 or 5 things that really make this place special, and try to see ways in which you can replicate that, or find the city that's in your hometown that has at least some of that infrastructure, has the people that are thinking that way. So you're gonna have friends who are also starting companies, so you can talk to them about all the issues and challenges you have along the way, because they're gonna be your best resource.
I love the question. So it's a good one.
You're not going to skirt it?
No, I'll try to be as direct as possible. If you take anything, what is American? Okay, I mean, really, what is American? American is a very heterogeneous place, and most Americans don't know America very, very well. Okay, the largest ethnic group in the United States are Germans, interestingly enough. But most Americans can find their immigrant not much more than 2 generations back. Okay, my grandmother came from the old country, Ukraine. I don't know where you guys came from, but generally speaking, an American is an immigrant. And if you have to think about that, those are people who the circumstances they were so bad, or the opportunity here so great, that they're willing to leave everything behind, right, including their family and their friends, and come here and start again. That's fundamentally the American character, you know, and it is full of hope. So if you learn anything from this, you know, Americans work harder, we have shorter vacations and longer work hours than any other OECD nation. It's not because we're wonderful, hardworking people. It's because there's a lot of competition. Okay, technical, skilled people can come here and take jobs. All right, people need to work hard and stay with it. You know, so there is, again, the opportunity and the threat. So if you go back to your home country and understand that Americans are a diverse group of people. Nobody sitting here, the only way you could tell I'm Ukrainian is because my genes are trying to turn me into Khrushchev. But other than that, you know, and they are, you know, but other than that, you can't tell. And when you step off the plane in San Francisco to come here, nobody can tell you're not American. 1/3 of the population of San Francisco is Chinese. You know, 62% of all the startups in Silicon Valley are started from people that were not born in the United States. So if you learn anything from the United States, take back that, you know, it's not the safest place, it's got opportunity, it's very diverse, it's very big, and if the last thing I'll tell you, if you really want to know the United States, visit it. The United States is not San Francisco and Las Vegas and Los Angeles and New York. Visit Detroit, visit Cleveland, visit Kansas City, visit Tupelo, Mississippi. Just visit those places, eat the local food, learn the United States, then go back. You learn more.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was a great answer to the question. Thank you to all of your insights. Thanks to all of you. I think that was a great conversation. Let's give you all a round of applause. one of the themes we heard here, and one of the things that you were all encouraged to do is network. So we are here for another hour. Now is your opportunity to network with all of the other folks here, to chat with our panelists here. There are drinks and food, so please take advantage of that. I would also encourage you, as part of that networking, to try and talk to 2 people you don't know in this room. Someone who's not on your program, preferably someone from another country, although as we just heard, you probably won't be able to figure that out. But give it an attempt anyway. And a last piece of news for anybody actually here, we have a participant event or alumni event tomorrow evening, a baseball game, San Francisco Giants, and we actually have extra tickets. So if people are interested, I don't know where. Thank you. The front table, if you're interested, please head over there and you can sign up and get some tickets for the game tomorrow night. So again, thank you to everybody. Have a good rest of the evening.
Go Giants.
Go Giants.